I don't need you anymore. I'm ready.
Well, I cannot believe it. After nearly a decade, the day has finally come that we get a brand new, full, traditional Silent Hill video game. It's been a long time coming, but the Silent Hill 2 remake developed by Bloober Team is out now, in early access if you got the deluxe edition of the game. I'm a huge fanboy of a lot of fictional stuff, from books to movies and obviously video games. It often feels like 90% of my time is spent in some form of make-believe. And out of all those fictional worlds, Silent Hill is undoubtedly one of my favorites. It's one of the franchises that means the most to me, and it's my favorite horror IP of all time when it comes to the art design and the symbolism and the themes and the stories being told within. And the original Silent Hill 2 is probably my favorite survival horror game of all time. This and Resident Evil 4, but definitely Silent Hill 2 when it comes to your more traditional survival horror experiences. And there was a huge chunk of my life where I not only considered this to be my all-time favorite game, but also my favorite story ever told. So with all that being said, I gotta be honest with you guys. When this remake was first announced and it was said that Bloober Team were gonna be the developers, I was a little skeptical. I was a little hesitant. I thought that the first couple trailers looked a little out of touch, mainly because the characters seemed a little too emotional, and I'm a firm believer that Silent Hill is at its best when it's understated and subtle, and in a lot of Bloober Team's previous games, they're pretty heavy-handed when it comes to getting the emotion across, and they're often way too in-your-face with their themes of mental illness, and I was worried that they were going to do the same here in the Silent Hill 2 remake. But don't get me wrong, I was never one of those people that were actively hating on Bloober Team. I was never the person to say that the Silent Hill 2 remake was dead on arrival, and I certainly wasn't one of the people to act like I knew what the game was going to be before we even got to play it. And if you want to, you can actually check out some of my previous videos from a while ago talking about the remake and my thought process going into it. Specifically, my top 3 things the Silent Hill 2 remake needs to do video and my should Silent Hill have stayed dead video. But anyways, like I said, the Silent Hill 2 remake came out today and I've been playing it. I've been playing it for hours since early this morning, which means I have a lot of thoughts that I want to share with you guys. So I'm going to jump into the review. I'm going to show you guys some raw gameplay, but before I do that, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, if you're new here. I talk about video games all the time on this channel. I do day one reviews just like this. I do other video game discussions as well. And I'm going to be talking about the Silent Hill 2 remake more than just in this one video, so consider subscribing if you want to be part of the discussion. Now, enough with this introduction. Let's talk about the reason why we're all here, which is a brand new Silent Hill game, and to see if whether or not Bloober Team pulled off a nearly unobtainable feat. So first off, this is a first impressions review. I have been playing the game for hours and I'm a good chunk of the way through, but still, I have not seen those credits roll, so just keep that in mind as I go over my initial thoughts. But my life is at a complete and utter standstill until I beat the game. I stopped only to bust out this initial review for you guys, but as soon as I click the upload button, I'm jumping back into the game until it's over. Then I'm gonna do it all over again. I'm pulling an all-nighter for this shit, something I haven't done in years. So with that being said, sometime within the next week, I'm gonna upload my full review, so keep an eye out for that one, because I imagine it'll probably be one of my longest, most in-depth reviews to date. And also, for this review, I'm going to keep it completely spoiler-free. I'll talk about the story a little bit, but I won't get into any super specific details, and I'm only going to show you gameplay from the first couple hours. If you're a new player, I want to make sure you experience most of this game with the cleanest eyes possible. But yeah, anyway, is this Silent Hill 2 remake any good? Yes, it is. So far, it's been absolutely phenomenal, and my jaw has just been kinda hanging ajar for the past few hours as I just sit here and accept the reality that Bloober Team actually pulled it off. They actually made a banger of a game. It reminds me so much of the Resident Evil 2 remake in the sense that it feels like a completely modernized take, full of aspects that make it feel entirely fresh and surprising, even to those who know the original game like the back of their hands, while simultaneously being so incredibly faithful that there's no doubt in your mind that the heart, the soul, and the overall essence of the original game has somehow managed to stay intact and remain well preserved. In fact, on a technical level, like when it comes to the actual level design, dialogue, and the overall tone and vibe, I'd say this is actually a lot more faithful than the Resident Evil 2 remake. So far from what I've experienced, it's actually one of the most faithful video game recreations that I've ever seen. Again, more so than the Resident Evil 2 remake, definitely more so than the Resident Evil 3 and 4 remakes as well. And I'm not hating on those games, by the way. I love the Resident Evil remakes, and I love a lot of the changes they made and the liberties they took. But when it comes to Silent Hill, especially Silent Hill 2, I wanted preservation first and foremost, and we absolutely got that here. A lot of my fears were put to rest almost immediately. As soon as I loaded up the game, the sound design was top tier, the eerie music in the main menu, the sound effects the game makes when you click through the presets and the accessibility options, it was nothing but green flags. The tone that I wanted was already there. Then when the game opens up and we get the initial voiceover acting from James, I was just immediately sold. Again, any doubt in my mind was just gone. The performance was practically exactly what I wanted it to be and what it should have been. His acting isn't overly emotional or too dramatic. He doesn't feel too human. And even though that might sound like a negative, trust me, it's a compliment. It really, really is when it comes to Silent Hill. He's understated. He's subtle. His performance has just the perfect amount of uncanny valley going on, and that really helps provoke the overall dreamlike vibe that Silent Hill 2 has. And those sentiments go for pretty much everyone else in the game too. Maria is great. Angela is fantastic. She feels so faithful to her original counterpart, and I was just instantly reminded of why I loved her character so much in the original. Even in the very beginning of the game, when you hear the voiceover acting of Mary's letter, it's perfect. Perfect, I tell you. And I genuinely don't think I'm exaggerating. The weak shake that's happening in her voice, the perfect blend of sadness and love that comes out with every single word. Her performance, again, is just exactly what it should be. But speaking of Mary's letter and all that, let me give you a brief synopsis of what the narrative in Silent Hill 2 is if you're a new player. Again, no spoilers, I'm just going to give you the general setup, but you play as a dude named James Sunderland, and when the game begins, you have just arrived on the outskirts of Silent Hill. You're there because you received a letter from your wife telling you that she's waiting for you somewhere in the town, but the kicker is that your wife died years ago, so you have no idea how she could have sent you a letter, let alone be actually waiting for you somewhere in Silent Hill. So anyway, you go into the town and you quickly learn that something wrong is going on. The town is shrouded in fog. The place is a ghost town. Everything looks run down and ruined. It looks like no one has lived there for years. And to make matters worse, there's monsters littered throughout the town that all seem to have the same collective goal of just making sure that you don't survive your trip to Silent Hill. But yeah, the story is great one of the best ever told in a video game, and I genuinely mean that. It's horrifying, it's emotional, it messes with your head, and I love every moment of it.
I'm kind of lost.
Lost?
Yeah, I'm looking for Silent Hill. Is this the right way?
Yeah. It's hard to see with this fog, but there's only the one road. You can't miss it.
Thanks.
But let's get back to the game itself. I've talked about the story and the performances a little bit, but how's the combat and the general gameplay? Is it actually fun to play Silent Hill 2 Remake? Yes, it is. The game actually plays and functions a lot more smoothly than I was expecting it to. Obviously, everyone had their worries about the game when it came to the narrative and the acting performances, but another thing I was worried about was the technical performance. Obviously, Bloober Team is a smaller developer, and their previous games were a lot smaller than this one. And also, the first gameplay combat trailer we saw looked like the game needed a little longer in the oven, but luckily so far from what I've experienced, the game was baked to near perfection as well. I'm playing on performance mode on the PlayStation 5 and it runs incredibly smooth. I haven't really noticed any game-breaking bugs. I haven't noticed anything on a technical level that lessens the experience in any significant way. There's some slight lighting issues every now and then, just lights flickering that shouldn't be, and sometimes a little bit of visual stuttering when James gets caught in some of the more claustrophobic environments, but those are few and far between, and when they do happen, and again, in my experience, they self-correct pretty quickly. Now let's talk about the combat. I really like it. James doesn't feel overpowered, which I appreciate. I was worried he'd feel like a badass, and I didn't want that. Luckily, he feels like a normal dude fighting these monsters, like an average Joe holding a plank of wood. And a big reason for that is how good the audio design is when you're engaged in combat. Hearing James grunt and squeal and practically hyperventilate whenever he's engaged in combat adds so much to the immersion. Combat can be difficult, which I appreciate. I almost got killed during my first combat encounter, which I wasn't expecting, and pretty much every other combat encounter after that, I left at least a little bit bloody. And dying is a legit possibility, especially when you have to deal with more than one enemy at once. However, once you get into the flow of things, sometimes the game on its normal difficulty can feel a little too easy at times, mainly because the game gives you a decent amount of health, so a lot of the time I didn't really feel like I was in danger. But if you're a survival horror game veteran, I'd recommend maybe upping the difficulty just one notch above normal for your first playthrough if you want a more traditional Silent Hill experience when it comes to the difficulty, but that's not a requirement at all. Again, the game on the standard difficulty is still incredibly fun and still has its fair share of challenge. As far as the actual town of Silent Hill goes, and the map and the exploration, I'm gonna dive into that mostly in my full review, but I will say here that just like most other aspects of the game, it's great. Again, it's very faithful to the original, but it's been added to. But the liberties they did take and the stuff they added have yet to ruin anything, but instead they just add to the town and make exploration arguably the best in any Silent Hill game ever. But I want to spend a lot more time with the game before I say that definitively, but trust me, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. I think you're going to be blown away with the town, exploring it, and everything about it. Also, I'm glad to say that this game is scary. The sound design is so great that I felt practically nothing but constant tension, and the sound of the monsters in the distance and your radio going off, and again, the phenomenal score and soundtrack were just absolutely nightmare-inducing. It's definitely one of the scarier survival horror games of recent years, and that's saying a lot because there's some pretty scary ones. I don't know if I personally find it as scary as like Dead Space or something, but that's probably just a me thing because Dead Space is the scariest game I ever played. I also don't know if it's as scary to me either as Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake 2 was horrifying, but the Silent Hill 2 remake very well might be in third place when it comes to how scary I find a lot of the more modern survival horror games. Definitely scarier than Alone in the Dark, definitely scarier than Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 3 and Resident Evil Village. I'd say it's about as scary as Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. But again, that's just my scale. I know fear is subjective. I'm sure some of you watching this won't find it scary at all, and I'm sure a lot of you will be a lot more horrified than I was. But anyway, that's my quick and brief thoughts on the Silent Hill 2 Remake after spending a handful of hours with it. Again, I'm going to play the game a lot more, and I'm going to cover it a lot more on this channel going forward, including a longer, more in-depth spoiler review, so look forward to that. And yeah, I just can't believe that so far it seems that Bloober Team pulled off a nearly impossible task. Remaking a beloved cult classic for a very committed, dedicated, and very specific fan base is not an easy task. But you know, it seems like they did it, and I still can't believe it. But anyway, have you played the Silent Hill 2 remake yet? If you have, let me know what you're thinking about it in the comments down below. Are you enjoying it as much as I am? Or are you enjoying it a lot less? Or are you going to skip the game completely? Either way, I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments down below. Once again, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.